Roman Empire, slavery was a common practice that spread with the expansion of the empire. Every slave varied with their intellectual capacity, how they were treated, and the jobs that they held, while the factors that affected this included their masters, genders, and reason behind them becoming a slave. The most common way one would become a slave was through military conquest. Soldiers would catch people and sell them on the spot to slave dealers, who would then send the slaves to popular slave markets. This is similar to the slavery that exists in Sahel, particularly the area Mauritania, where the descendants of black Africans were captured during slave raids, and their position as slaves are then passed down through their generations. This creates the current illegal process of holding, buying, and selling slaves in this part of Africa. If a Roman slave fell into debt, they could voluntarily sell members of their family or themselves into slavery. Likewise, in South Asia, people took large loans under the impression that they will eventually work off the debt. The loan is designed so that it can never be paid off and is often passed down through generations, much like the cycle of Roman slavery. Once trapped in this method of repayment, they are often overworked past what they owe and are led to working under abuse, threats, and power, eventually turning it into a form of slavery. The lives of slaves differed greatly, based on factors such as location, their masters, and their sex. Rural slaves were usually unskilled farm workers, and they were chained together and spent the majority of their time doing heavy manual labor in fields under overseers. They were locked up in places similar to a workhouse called ergastulus at night. This treatment is very similar to the contemporary forms of slavery held today in order to keep the slaves under control. The urban slaves in Rome had more experience than the rural slaves. They could hold jobs such as teachers and artists, and some of these slaves were raised together with their masters' children, while others were confidants and even friends of their masters. They were able to receive an education, have their own family, and live like free members of the family. All of these standards mostly depended on their master. Some masters, like Pliny the Younger, treated their slaves kindly, while others abused them. Eventually, the conditions and treatments of slaves improved greatly as Christianity increased their rights. It is estimated that around 10 million people would have been a slave in Rome. This would be 16.6% to 20% of the estimated entire population of the empire in the 1st century AD. The majority of slaves were in Italy and the capital itself. In Rome, there were many numbers in the imperial household and in the civil service. Common ways slaves were freed were through money or manumission. Using peculium, which was a fund of money the slave was allowed to build up, he would eventually save enough of it to buy his way out of slavery. Some urban slaves were outright freed by their master, usually through a will or sometimes if they were childhood friends with their owner. This is the process of manumission. In the Roman Empire, around 6.5 to 7.5 million urban slaves were free, and 49 to 52 million rural slaves were free. Once a slave is freed, they are then able to gain citizenship. Through formal manumission, which was performed by a magistrate, freedmen were able to receive full Roman citizenship. The only exception to being a citizen was that neither they nor their children could ever hold office. Informal manumission made slaves unable to become citizens, and any property or wealth they accumulated reverted to their former owners when they died. Once slaves gained citizenship, they were looked down upon by other citizens, even if they did reach a high and respectable status. The freedman who formerly had only one slave name gained the name of his master's family as praenomen and nomen. The slave's name remained as cognomen. Slaves freed through manumission often wore a pileus when they were liberated to signify their freedom. A praetor would touch the slave with a windicut, and then the slave's head was shaved and a pileus was placed on top of it. Slaves resisted their masters using many different techniques. One of them included outsmarting and annoying their master using their wit. This is what one of Publius's slaves did during an important dinner party. Some slaves assaulted or even murdered their slave owners in a form of slavery resistance. Because masters were so paranoid of their slaves turning against them and then possibly getting murdered, a law was created that stated if a slave killed his master, then all of the slaves owned by that person would be put to death. Others would use simpler and less dangerous tactics, such as stealing food, falsifying records, or embezzling money from their owners. Slaves in Rome also resisted through rebellion, and one of the most popular revolts was led by Spartacus. Some slaves tried to run away, and if they were caught, they would eventually get killed.